Hello and welcome to this very special edition of The Debate. Today we're joined by candidates for the Salford and Eccles constituency in the upcoming general election. Let's meet the candidates fighting it out for your vote. We have Rebecca Long-Bailey from the Labour Party, the Conservative candidate Atika Chowdhury, Brian Blears of the Green Party, Jake Overend of the Lib Dems and Matt Mickler representing the Brexit Party. There they are and here we go. Each candidate will begin with a 2-minute opening statement before we dive into the juicy stuff and get to your questions. We'll start from the right with the opening statements and work our way round. Rebecca.
Thank you, and thanks for having us here. I think after 10 years of brutal austerity, the city of Salford is struggling. We haven't received the investment that we deserve, and we know that many people right across the city are struggling to make ends meet, not to mention our public services being on the brink of collapse in many cases. So I'm standing on a manifesto of hope that will bring real change to places like Salford and other cities and towns across the UK. And there are many powerful people who over the next week will tell us that this is not possible, that we can't change our lives and that we don't deserve this. And I'm here to say today that we can and it is possible. We've said that we'll tackle the climate emergency by investing in a green industrial revolution that will rebuild places like Salford and bring new industry and new jobs. We'll insulate 27 million homes across Salford and the UK to make them energy efficient and to bring people's energy bills down. We've said that we'll end the homelessness crisis by investing in the support that homelessness people need, as well as building up to 150 million social council houses every single year under a Labour government. And we've said that we'll reset our economy and rebuild it by providing our public services with the funding that they desperately need, from the NHS all the way through to education, and making sure those who work in public services get a pay rise. So what I want to say today in my final closing comments are that the reason I became a politician is because I think the role of government is to deliver the best possible quality of life it can to its people. And the people of Salford and Eccles have been shortchanged for the last 10 years. They haven't been given that quality of life. And I will fight, if I'm lucky enough to be elected in this general election, to deliver the transformational manifesto that we've set out as a Labour Party to ensure they get that quality of life that they deserve.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca. We'll move on to Jake from the Liberal Democrats.
The last 3 years have been absolute deadlock in politics because of the question of Brexit. I am proud to be the only candidate here that is giving people of Salford the opportunity to move on, put this all behind us and stop Brexit. That's a clear answer on the Brexit question, and I believe I'm the only candidate here that can do that by the 12th of December. The Tory deal, despite what Boris Johnson and the Conservatives say, will take years and years of implementation, with trade negotiations going on with the EU, with every other country in the world. The Labour deal doesn't exist yet, is going to take several months to negotiate with the EU. Then we're not even entirely sure where the Labour Party stands on whether it will fight for its own deal or support Remain, despite campaigning for Remain 3 years ago themselves. But this is not just about Brexit. This is a Brexit election, but there are other things going on. I've been privately rented in Salford as long as I've lived here for the last 6 years. I understand the pressure that young people in particular are facing to save up to buy their own house, because I'm doing the same myself. So I'm proud that our manifesto is committing to 300,000 new houses per year, 100,000 of which are council houses, which will make a real difference to people in Salford. I'm proud of the 35-hour commitments to childcare that our party is endorsing, which will make a real difference to working people in Salford, enabling single parents to go back into work. And beyond Brexit and beyond our policies as well, I've spoken to so many people across Salford, both before and during this election campaign, who are tired of the same old politics of constantly voting for either Labour or the Conservatives, or believing that their only choice is to vote for one of the other. But I'm here to stay. As a Liberal Democrat candidate, you don't have to choose the lesser of two evils. We can do much better than that, but we have to vote for politicians that are willing to change our political system.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jake. We'll come to Brian Blears from the Green Party.
Thank you. It's been a hugely successful year for the Greens. We secured over 2 million votes in the European elections, doubling our number of MEPs. We doubled our number of local councillors in May, and we've had a huge surge in membership across the country. Now in December, we're standing in hundreds of seats to offer an alternative to the mainstream parties who have got us into the mess that we're currently in. I'm really proud to be standing for the Green Party in Salford, my home constituency. And over the past year, I've been travelling the city, meeting constituents who are concerned about the direction we're travelling in. We have increased traffic and congestion across our city, worsening poverty in our town centres, and our green space is under threat under Labour. I want to change all that and be a candidate that will represent local priorities and local people, but as well as that, I want to take on the important work of transforming Britain on behalf of the Green Party. We are in a climate emergency. Our message is that business can't carry on as usual, and we're putting forward our bold manifesto to transform Britain's economy and society to put the environment first. Our message to the other parties and to the electorate is this: anything we do short of everything will not be enough. Please vote Green on December 12th. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. We'll come to Atika Chowdhury for the Conservative Party.
So 3.5 years ago, we voted for a referendum where we had to leave the EU. 56.8% of people in Salford and Eccles want to leave the EU, and yet that has not been done because the Labour government has stopped us from getting Brexit done. Now today we have this election on the 12th of December because we know it's important to get this Brexit deal, respect people's decision because that's also very important. I've been out talking to people in Salford and Eccles who basically want this deal. They're happy with Boris Johnson's deal. We've had a deal. People believe in our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, negotiated a deal. He's brought back a deal. We can get Brexit done if we can get a majority. For the past 9 years, the Conservatives have been cleaning up the catastrophic financial situation that Labour had left with us in 2010. Because of the tough decisions that they had left with us, we have made a success of our economy. We've had better education. We also have had better public finances. And, if we continue going down the road that we are going down, we're not going to have affordable housing. We're not going to have cleaner environment. We're not going to have reduced crime rates. The problem in Salford and Eccles is much wider than I've seen, having spoken to people, going out on a day-to-day basis, and astounded by what's happening. And if we want to value people, if we want to serve people and respect their decision, then we need to get this Brexit done. And I say to them, go and vote for the Conservative Party, not just for me, but for the Conservative Party, because we are the party who can get this deal, invest in NHS, and for the people, and for the schools, and our towns. Regeneration is very important right now in a lot of towns, not just in Salford and Eccles, but across Greater Manchester. People talk about homelessness. I haven't seen anything being done. They say that homelessness was going to be sorted out by 2020. We need to get that sorted out. We have a lot of things that we want to do, but we have to get these negotiations and have a good trade deal with the EU. Thank you.
Excellent. And we'll come to Matt Mickliffe from the Brexit Party.
Thank you very much. I'm very proud to stand in Salford and Eccles for the Brexit Party. Brexit means breaking away from the old. One thing that obviously we're focusing on is wanting to leave the European Union, but this idea of leaving this federalist trading bloc was given to us as a gift. We rarely get influenced this way to decide our future, and I'm afraid this future is bigger than any one of us, bigger than Farage, bigger than Boris, bigger than Corbyn. If we don't get given democracy fairly and justly, we need to take it. We will take the control of our destiny and forge our way in the world, because Brexit, as I mentioned, is about breaking away from the old ways. Brexit and the Brexit Party is just the beginning. We want and we will have Brexit. We will win this first battle and continue to be the Brexit Party throughout. We will Brexit from the EU and its xenophobic attitudes to non-Europeans. We will Brexit from the traditional left and right politics. We will Brexit from the first past the post system, allowing a true democratic representation of the country. Several parties trying to be actually democratic and work together for the good of the nation. I don't want us to be a nation of just Tories or socialists. I want us to Brexit from the ridiculous public cuts, Brexit from the centralised investment, Brexit from the poor immigration system and unfair trading arrangements we have because of our EU membership. I want us to Brexit from poor infrastructure, poor schools, poor connectivity. I want us to Brexit from having limited and expensive choices when it comes to produce and services. I want us to Brexit from the traditional monopoly corporations and poor taxation loopholes and open up more free markets with sensible regulation as opposed to unfair ones. I want us to Brexit from the need to rely on overseas workforce, where I would like us to be a nation of homegrown, start-up, educated people who will be empowered to work in the healthcare and rewarded for it too sector, and the incentive to go into STEM types of jobs. I want us to Brexit from sole EU attention and focus not only on the EU, of course, but growing countries in Africa and across the world. I want them to be allowed easier and fairer access. I want us to Brexit from the lack of affordable housing.
10 seconds to finish up.
Ridiculous rental prices and poor connectivity of UK's towns. We've got a lot of work to do. Let's bring the power back to the local communities and local people. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all for your opening statements. And seeing as many of you mentioned it there, let's deal with the European-sized elephant in the room. And our first question on that topic comes from Chris, 19 of Media City. Chris asks, I run an online business with a significant EU customer base who would be inconvenienced and receive additional charges if free movement of goods between the UK and the EU were to cease post-Brexit. Can you all explain the benefit of Brexit to me and my business and what you intend to do to prevent the cessation of the freedom of movement of goods? And we'll start with Rebecca Long-Bailey on this. Your party has come under a lot of criticism for its Brexit policy. So, in response to Chris, whether it's a Labour deal or Remain after a people's vote, is free trade inevitable?
I think we've got to have a deal that allows free trade and doesn't put any barriers in the way of Chris's business or any other businesses in the UK, and that's been at the heart of what we've been trying to negotiate with various parties in Westminster over the last 3 years. Now, I appreciate there have been differences of opinion. Certain parties or elements of parties have taken different views. But right at the heart of what we've been wanting to negotiate for is a customs union that would mean there'd be no checks at the border on goods that were coming in or out. We want strong single market alignment as much as possible so that Chris and his business or any other businesses aren't impeded by regulatory frameworks or checks. And we also want a floor under existing rights and protections to protect us against the goods that come in, to make sure that there are an adequate quality. And what we've said we'll do, after 3 years of shambolic drama in Parliament that's been led by the Conservative government, is that we'll negotiate that deal within 3 months. We will put it to a public vote within 6 months so that people will decide whether they're happy with that deal. Was it what they voted for? And it will be put alongside Remain. So it will be a people's vote to decide the outcome, and we'll respect
Excellent.
the result of that vote.
Thank you very much. Jake, your party wants to stop Brexit altogether, so what do you have to say to Chris?
Yeah, it's a relatively easy question for me, this one, Chris, because to be fair, I agree a lot with what Rebecca said about maintaining frictionless trade with the EU. The best way we do that, let's not have Brexit. That's why I'm representing a party who is giving people the opportunity to vote for something that will stop Brexit entirely, so people like Chris don't have to deal with all these obstacles that come with negotiating a new Brexit deal where we may or may not have frictionless trade, depending on what sort of deal that is you're going for. I'm happy to endorse a position where that isn't an issue, because a Liberal Democrat majority would stop Brexit entirely. In all other circumstances, the Liberal Democrats would endorse a people's vote and give people the option to choose what they want to do again.
Okay, wonderful. We'll come to a ticker now, because the Conservative Party are the only one with a deal that's on the table. What's your response to this question, and need Chris be worried?
No, why should Chris be worried? I mean, the Conservative Party is a party of business. We help businesses, small businesses, medium businesses, large businesses. That's what we do. And, you know, part of Brexit is, it doesn't mean that when we come out of the EU that we don't have any negotiations with the EU. We are going to have relationships with the EU and work with the EU. That is what we are, that's what we plan to do. The Brexit deal is the only deal that's on the table, and nobody has any idea about what else is going on. We've put it on the table. We said, this is what we want. This is what the businesses need. And with the EU, the free trade negotiations are important. I mean, the deal doesn't block everything. Yes, we want to be a sovereign state and away from all that, but it's really important to support small businesses. Businesses like Chris have always been supported over before even, you know, when we were part of the EU. So, you know, but we cannot give him a clear, coherent message until Brexit is done to help support his business.
Wonderful. So, Brian, where do you stand on this question, and what do you say to Chris?
Okay, so it's not just Chris's business, I'm afraid, that's at threat. It's obviously our national infrastructure and everything that our NHS relies on, for example, supplies and drugs and workforce, etc., that's at threat. The Greens were a Remain party. We campaigned to Remain a couple of years ago. We didn't win that referendum, and where we differ from the Liberal Democrats is that we recognise that that referendum took place. We would like to look at remaining. We still do believe that that is the right thing for the country to do, but we would want to do it in a democratic way, and the only way to do that, the only way to resolve this deadlock that's taken place in Parliament is to go back to a vote. What I think is very concerning is the way that Labour has switched its stance, and that many politicians, including Rebecca here today, have supported Remain in the past and are now saying that they'll support Leave. I don't understand the business case for that. I feel that it's something done to win votes, so I'd love to hear an explanation.
Excellent, wonderful. And we'll come finally to Matt. Your party's proposing a clean break Brexit, which presumably we're on a double WTO agreement. What do you say to local businesses that are worried about free trade?
We realise and recognise that a clean break Brexit probably is not going to be achievable in the current demographics at the moment in Parliament. What we are advocating for is a very quick transition period, so we were able to actually go into a deal quite quickly. We don't want to have disruptions if we can avoid it. I would like to see a situation where we'd be able to subsidise any tariffs from certain industries that may be imposed on them. Now, what we were doing in terms of business rates, we are looking at small businesses, and any business that is not making profit of over £10,000, we would abolish business rates altogether. So any business that's going through this transition period with the rest of the country that may have to, or find themselves after transition period being found that they have to be on a deal where it may be WTO rules, where they find that their sector is hit with tariffs, certainly the business rates will help and reduce some of the costs for them.
Excellent. So staying on the topic of Brexit, Mark, who's an architect from Peel Green and Eccles, has sent in this question. The 2016 referendum result was a majority Leave in Salford constituencies. How can a Remain MP represent the interests of the electorate? Brian, can a Remain MP possibly represent this constituency?
Well, there's always a debate, isn't there, between what is best for Salford, and the view that we had during the original referendum was that leaving Europe wouldn't be good for Salford. I think Brexit really came about because of a question, and that question was, what is Britain's future? And a lot of people looked at the European project and said that they didn't want to go in that direction, which is fair enough. What we've seen over the last 3 years, though, is that nobody really has a solution, an alternative direction for us to go in. And therefore, you know, I think that we've had enough time now to realise that the current approach isn't working. So we don't want to overthrow the previous decision, but what we do need to do is go to the people and say, these are the options now, 3 years later. Which one of them do you prefer? And then we will carry that out to the best of our
Wonderful.
ability.
We'll come back to Matt again. The Brexit Party did remarkably well in the EU elections, particularly in the North West. How much optimism does that give you that the Brexit question is really the fundamental one in this election?
I think certainly the Brexit question is going to be left unanswered for a short period of time, hopefully, if the Conservatives manage to actually successfully leave the European Union. The reason why we did very well in the European Union elections is parties that have been focused on criticising the EU or wanting to leave the EU have always done very well in the European elections. We'll always have a Brexit. The Brexit question at the moment is how we leave, how quickly we're going to leave, what the effects are. I want to come back to the original question, if I may, about the Remain MP. We have currently constituencies that voted to leave, and we do have Remain MPs in them. Now, I wouldn't necessarily think it's the right thing to do to remove a Remain MP when the constituency is a leave area. I think they need to work with the community, they need to work with those and focus on the priorities, and a lot of people will be prioritising Brexit, some won't be.
Wonderful. We'll come back to Rebecca Long-Bailey now. Obviously, Salford did vote to leave in the 2016 referendum. Do Brexit voters here have a right to feel let down by Parliament frustrating Brexit process?
Certainly by Parliament, because I think the Conservative Party, what they should have done at the beginning of the negotiations was to reach across the political divide to all parties and look at what we were going to try and negotiate for. And instead, I think they tried to play to crowds within their own party, and then we ended up with 3 years of a mess, quite frankly. Even in the negotiations that I took place in, where we were offering to reach a compromise with Theresa May, it was clear that even if she put certain things on the table, her own party weren't even going to back her on that compromise, which is why we're trying to bring the country back together now. We've always said that we respected the result of the referendum, and we always said that we tried to get the best possible economic deal, that's clear. But now we know that things have moved to a point where to bring divided communities together, we've got to get that economically credible deal, and we've got to let the people decide upon whether they're happy with that deal or not. And that's the manifesto that I'm standing on. As Jeremy Corbyn has said that he's going to be neutral on this, because his role as Prime Minister is to bring the country together and to make sure we can get the best possible deal he can.
I'll have to cut you off there. We'll move to Atika again. Is Brexit the deciding factor then? Does the candidate have to be a Brexiteer?
Well, let's answer talk about, Parliament decided not to support Brexit, the deals that we were bringing in the first place. I mean, every single time we brought a deal in, whether it was Conservative or Labour, we're supposed to be working together. And none of us were working together. And that's why we haven't got a deal. Now, today we brought back a deal. We wanted that support, yet we didn't get that support. You know, that's why we're having an election on the 12th of December, to have a majority. We have to respect people's decision. People wanted to get out of the EU and voted leave, especially in Greater Manchester and Salford and Eccles. I mentioned earlier on, 56.8%. We're not respecting people's decision at all. I mean, if you look at it in the wider spectrum, you know, people, if having another vote will not change anything. We've said people want to, and I've been talking to people myself here, that they want to get out of the EU. They're fed up. They're fed up of what's going on because politicians cannot make a decision, and that's why I'm sitting here today wanting to say to people that actually we can get this deal. Do support what's on the deal, because there's lots of good things in there.
Wonderful.
Otherwise, I won't be supporting that deal sitting here
I'll cut
today.
you off there.
Yeah.
Let's go to Jake now, because as I said before, your party would, if it gained a majority, would like to scrap the referendum result entirely. Would that be fair on the people of Salford and Eccles who voted for Brexit?
The position, I'd just like to correct what Brian said a little bit earlier about position not necessarily being democratic, because he knows full well that it would be a democratic decision. If we won a majority,
It would be a mandate.
That would be our mandate to then stop Brexit. Of course, the issue with this is that Brexit permeates so much of our politics at the minute, but it isn't everything. So MPs and constituents, they disagree on a lot of things a lot of the time, because obviously you can't have an MP that represents every single person's views. And I firmly believe that while it's important to have an MP that represents a majority of people's views, on Brexit, yeah, I will firmly point out that I do want to remain, and so if people are firmly against leaving, then I'm not necessarily the kind of person that could best represent them for that. But as Rebecca was saying earlier, this all could have been sorted a long time ago if the Conservatives had actually decided to reach out and form a cross-party agreement with people. We're in this position of wanting to stop Brexit now because they didn't do that in the first place.
Excellent. Right, so we're going to move on from Brexit now to our next hot topic. I'd invite all of the candidates to be original enough to not rely on their Brexit stance and to really give the people a good idea of what their party's policies are, irrespective of their opinions on Brexit. Our next hot topic is the environment. Many are saying that this is the election of the environment, and we have a question here sent in by Paul from Pendlebury, who is an outdoor instructor, and Paul wants to know, he says that Salford is the second most polluted place in the country. Neither public transport nor cycling will solve the vast number of commuters driving through the city. What would you do to get traffic moving in Salford? And we're going to start with Atika.
Well, I know there's a bus consultation going on right now as we speak. The Salford and Eccles people, the constituents, have the right. By the 8th of January, they can decide if they want buses. That's one mode of transportation that you can get. Obviously, we have trams running here as well. It's really important to, I mean, there has been opportunities to have a fair mode of transportation, and I think that when you look at the transportation availability, we, the Conservative Party, are investing more money. We've been given town funding, which means that we can bring that money in, invest more in public transport if we need it, and obviously we do need it because there is a lot of traffic in and around not just Salford but in the Greater Manchester area, and also, you know, having not just trams, buses, but easy, accessible, you know, driving. I mean, there's a lot of people who are driving at the moment, and we need to find ways how we can reduce emissions. Pollution's a big problem here, and one of the things that we want to do is reduce carbon emission by 2050.
Wonderful. Right, we'll come in, Brian, here, because I know you have strong opinions about the traffic in Salford, so
Yeah,
what do you say to Paul?
Absolutely. I've been campaigning on this for the past year, and traffic in Salford is at breaking point, let me be clear. On the East Lancs Road, the routes into Manchester and Regent Road in particular are a nightmare for people every single day. The green solution to this is, of course, we need better public transport, and we're campaigning for free buses, for that to be paid for by the government, so you can hop on and off a bus without having to pay. And we want to bring trains back into national ownership as well. Our Northern Rail service is abysmal, to be quite frank. But there's also more creative things that we want to do to reduce the amount of traffic on the roads. For example, we're looking at the option of a 4-day working week, but we also want to do things like to promote more home working and flexible working in order to ease the pressures of rush hour. We have around, we could save 800,000 journeys a year in Salford if 10% of our workforce were given the option to work from home 1 day a week. That would be a massive difference that we could make.
Brilliant. So let's bring Matt in on this. What do you say about the traffic in the centre of Salford?
Thanks for the question, Paul. I think that there's a lot of agreement on this panel about certainly public transport and investing in public transport. I would be keen, and in fact the party wants to invest in more hydrogen fuelled electric vehicles that are using renewable energy. We also would like to look at schemes where we could offer businesses, public institutions, an opportunity to have a right-to-work scheme that would obviously the government would pay for as well. I would like to also see and hope that we could look at the road infrastructure that we have at the moment. A lot of it is due to roadworks and expansion. If we can look at other countries where they actually focus and build and work on the roads at night, I'd be keen to look at something like that as well. But generally we need more infrastructure and an incentive to use public transport that's cheaper, cleaner and more efficient.
Fantastic. Jake?
Yes, so like a lot of people on this panel, I agree that public investment into our railway infrastructure and our public transit system is key to getting traffic down in Salford and Eccles. The Liberal Democrat position on this is that we would have complete electrification of our rail networks. Very ambitious project because it's a very difficult thing to do, but it's in our manifesto because we need to do these things because these things are difficult to do. We're not taking the Labour approach of putting railways into public ownership or the green approach of doing that because we don't believe that that will necessarily work for people. Instead, we are giving public bodies the option to buy franchises and rail networks if they so desire to and bid for them. That way, people will be able to choose what sort of system is best for them rather than either forcing it into public ownership or just allowing what's going on to continue at the minute. The other problem that traffic introduces is a massive issue with air pollution that we have in our community. I know Salford and Eccles has a very high level compared to World Health Organization standards on air pollution. We will introduce a nature act that will solve our air pollution problems by dealing with these issues through investment of our public transport systems.
Wonderful. Let's go to Rebecca.
So there's a huge amount we can do, and it's one small part of what we're calling a green industrial revolution. So we've got to get people using public transport, but the public transport networks, after years of underinvestment in Salford, are absolutely shocking. You can't get from one side of the city sometimes on a bus. You can get into Manchester, but if you want to get across Salford, you're going to be stuck. So we need to bring our bus networks into public ownership so that we can start providing routes that aren't profitable at the moment, but are necessary to get people to work. And as you've heard from the panellist already, we do need to invest in hydrogen-powered buses and electric buses going forward. We also said that we're going to bring trains back into public ownership so that we can invest in more trains so that people can travel to work that way. But importantly, we've also said that people are still going to want to use cars, and we've got to recognise that, particularly if they're coming from difficult areas. So we want to start an electric vehicle revolution, investing 14 billion in upgrading the infrastructure that's available, making them affordable for people through scrappage schemes, community car clubs, and making all fleets electric. There will be no new combustion engines coming off production lines by 2030 under a Labour government.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your response. And we have had a lot of questions coming in about green spaces in the area, obviously very pertinent with the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. And we have a question on that matter here from Carl from Winton, who says the council has recently declared a climate emergency and is proposing to build thousands of new homes around Salford as part of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, whilst at the same time telling the public we need clean air zones. What are your opinions on this? And what would your party do to address and balance the need for new homes with the equally, if not more important, need to protect the planet and prevent further climate change? He also asks if you would agree that the current GMSF is hypocrisy. And we'll start with Matt on this question.
I would like to question and find out what types of homes, excuse me, that are being built. Are they affordable? Are they social? That'd be something I'd be interested in. I think generally house building should be a priority in Salford and Eccles, and yes, obviously we've got to be careful where we build these properties. Our party's stance is we would look and review the brownfield types of sites as well. Obviously we need to protect our natural environment as well, but the priority is we need to build more houses. There's not enough social or affordable houses at all in Salford. I go down in Ortal, I go around some of the wards and I see beautiful developments being built, 2, 3, 4 bedroom houses, over 200 grand, some of them. These are not affordable houses. I would rather reserve the space that we've got, the limited space that we've got, to build these types of houses that people can generally afford.
Excellent. We'll come straight in with Brian on this one.
Yeah, Matt's absolutely right. And in my view, Labour has let Salford down on this and Greater Manchester. I was in the room in 2017 when Andy Burnham said that Greenbelt would only be considered for council housing. And what we've seen, in fact, is deallocation of Greenbelt in Earlham, in Worsley and other parts of Salford for housing, of which a percentage will be council or affordable housing. The definition of affordability is a massive problem. It is based on house prices rather than on wages. So in fact, many of these properties that are classed as affordable aren't at all. And as Matt said, these are the wrong types of houses being built in the wrong places. We want to look at the national laws that are causing this, in particular the affordability element that allows developers to challenge that. But let me be clear, Salford Council is currently updating its policy to reflect a higher need for affordable and social housing. That means that it was previously wrong and they won't own up to that mistake.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And we'll come in with Rebecca Long-Bailey on that, since we've had the claim that Labour have let the constituency down with this policy. What do you have to say about the GMS?
Well, the Labour Council are working within a planning framework that was put in place by a Tory government. Let me make that clear. But what I would say is that in our manifesto, we do not condone building on green space. And as a local politician, I have joined campaigners against building on green space. There are a couple of developments that have happened, certainly in the last few years in Swinton, where campaigners have done a fantastic job and they have been supported by me as the local Labour politician. We need more homes, but we do need to be more creative with the sites that we use to build them on. And you know, panellists are right when they say they need to be more affordable, which is why we've set out in the manifesto that the criteria for what is going to be affordable will be looked at and amended so they truly are affordable homes, because the homes that are being built on the green space that I've talked about, they're not affordable homes. It's also important to recognise that a large portion of the housing in Salford that we also need to be council homes. The council have done their own job trying to set up a business to build what they can within the limits that they've got, and that's great, but we need to be building up to 150,000 council homes across the country.
Excellent. Jake, what are your thoughts on this matter?
I completely agree with what Brian was saying earlier on. I have campaigned in Salford locally for a number of years now, most recently in Clermont in the local elections, talking to people that are specifically concerned about areas like Duncan Maths and Plainfield, that were previously green spaces but are now considered not green spaces and being built upon anyway. So the definition of what green spaces are is, first of all, being changed, which I completely disagree with. And second of all, houses that are being built are, again, completely unaffordable. I was just speaking to residents at Clippers Quay yesterday in a meeting with them. There is a block called Cotton Quay, 1,500 apartments being built. Not a single one of them is affordable. Instead, the developers are giving money to Salford Council to develop affordable properties in a completely different area of Salford, essentially gentrifying the whole neighbourhood of the Quays and making it unaffordable for people to live there, like myself, because they're not able to buy an affordable property there. I'm completely against that, and I want to see a completely different approach. And it starts with building more housing to increase supply so that house prices are more attainable for people, which is why we are committed to 300,000 new homes.
Wonderful. So, Atika, how do we find an equilibrium with this idea of affordable homes, but also the environmental necessity?
Well, it's interesting to listen to everybody here. What I've noticed is that there aren't enough affordable homes in this area. The Labour Council have been in charge for a very long time and people can't afford prices. I mean, it's a working class area in certain areas that I've been going to. And if people can't afford it, what is the Labour Party doing? I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I question that. We have money, Section 106, which we can use to support that. I know that there are areas in Greenbelt, just outside of Salford and Eccles, that are being built on, which is wrong, that we should not be building on there. We should be protecting those green spaces. There is a brown areas that we should be building on, which we're not. And right now, affordable homes is not viable. And the worrying context says one of the things that we want to do, we want to invest in people having affordable homes. We have got, like I said earlier on, we have the township fund, which is bringing money in that will hopefully help people to build in areas where we can have affordable homes.
Excellent.
So we need to reconsider.
I'll have to ask you to finish your point.
We need to reconsider as to how they would benefit, because right now no one's benefiting, and Labour. I mean, there's a cladding issue that's been going on for many years, and that hasn't been resolved since the Grenfell. It's been 3 years.
We're going to have to cut you off there. We did have an objection over here from Brian, so as soon as we've got a couple of minutes left of this segment, let's open it up a little bit.
Yeah, to be fair, I agree with Atika as far as that Labour has not done enough and it has led some of these problems that we've faced in Salford. But it is under national legislation under her government that means that developers are allowed to challenge these developments on the basis of affordability, and it is also on the basis of her government that many of these things are happening. So we need legislatory changes that the Conservatives introduced, and they are driving some of that as well. So I don't agree.
Okay, thanks. I'll give Atika the chance to respond to that claim before we move to the next
segment. You may
segment.
say that we've obviously have legislation, but at the end of the day, like I said, we have money, pot of money, Section 106, which we can use if we want to build something, do something, we can do that. There's housing developments, there's housing associations actually. Most of the homes are being built done by housing associations. They're private associations. That's nothing to do with the government. That is to do with the associations
another
themselves.
point of information over on the right from Rebecca Long-Bailey.
I think housing associations they didn't exist many years ago when the Labour government was in power and we were building more council homes. And over the years, the Conservative governments have gradually eroded the powers that housing associations have and the funding that they have. So they're now in a position where to self-fund, they have to build private homes to keep themselves ticking over. And that's not acceptable. And that's why we're saying that Labour will build 150,000 council homes, real council homes, where we don't have to make a judgment between the private and the public sector. We will deliver on the basis of need.
Right, we have a minute left. Can we just hear from Matt and Jake just to make sure that we have this all balanced? And we'll start with Jake. Any further comments?
Well, I can find myself completely agreeing with Brian here. There are issues on both sides here. The Salford Council has not been strong enough when it comes to opposing developers in terms of what they are developing and what they are building in Salford, and residents are tired of that. And that is something that I'm personally affected by because I'm struggling to buy myself in Salford at the minute. But there are also issues from a national scale in that there isn't the legislation there to be able to produce the houses, and it's giving developers too much power to be able to build it, so they don't have to build affordable homes if they don't need to.
Matt?
I wonder why there is a lot of properties in Salford that are empty and not being filled with homeless people that need short-term shelter. So I would be very keen to see if there's any legislation or why these properties are not being used for that purpose. And I think while we're waiting for these supposed houses to be built, I really think this is an issue Salford and Eccles needs to address. And it's something I would address if I was to be elected as the MP. I would look at the private sector and houses. I'd look at the empty houses. I'd look at the houses that we could, as I said, we could use, or any properties, any business that's empty that we could potentially use as temporary accommodation.
Last 15
I
seconds.
just like to come back because there are empty buildings, like Matt's just said, derelict buildings, they're not being used. There are lots of empty properties in Salford and Eccles. And also, Rebecca mentioned, the Housing Association, but you have the private finance initiative. That's nothing to do with the government. That's got to do with what's happening locally and with private associations. They're the ones who are dealing with that. Nothing to do with the government legislation. If it's private bodies who are dealing with stuff like that, it's up to them.
I do research. I think we've got a number of housing associations right across Salford and Eccles. One of them is a joint private funded initiative, I agree, which we don't agree with as a Labour Party nationally. But the other housing associations, and there are numerous ones, are struggling to survive. And that's not acceptable. And that all happened under a Conservative government. On the issue of empty properties,
but who's in charge?
Local authorities.
Now?
Let me finish my point. Local authorities don't have the power to assess who owns properties. Many of these properties have been sold on through the right to buy. We were all told that we could own our own home, and they now ended up in the hands of private landlords and property speculators who were in offshore tax havens with no details and no ability for us in Salford to be able to put people in those homes. And that's not acceptable either.
That'll really have to be it on that segment now, because we really want to get through some of the questions that people have been sending in from the constituency. The next segment is going to deal with public services, and as you can imagine, we've had a plethora of questions coming in over a variety of different themes. The first one is from Andrew from Winton. He says, what will candidates do about the lack of policing in the area of Salford? The local police in the area are unstaffed and their budgets don't allow for overtime. With the increase of serious crime in the area, what are the candidates willing to do? And we're going to start with Atika Chowdhury on this question. Much has been made of the Conservative pledge for 20,000 new police officers on the streets. Many critics are saying that it's just a restitution of the ones that austerity robbed of the streets. What are your responses to Andrew's question?
Well, funny enough, I met a police officer yesterday when I was out in Salford and Eccles. And yes, we may have 20,000 new police officers. That is one of the key things. But we need, right now, there's a prevalence of crime in the area, not just in this area, but across the country. What we're trying to do is we're bringing back stop and search, more police officers separately away from the 20,000 new police officers. We're also we've got 750 million backing of investing more in terms of how we can prevent crime. And there are certain areas certainly in Oldstall and Langsworthy where we're not seeing enough police presence. And so therefore it's really important to ensure that we do have, and we will do, because that's one of the things that we want to bring into the area, and we really know how important it is to ensure the safety of our residents. So we have the money, we have the money, we have the backing, and we are going to do that once we get Brexit done.
Excellent. Jake, how will Lib Dem policy improve policing?
First of all, I'd just like to address Atika's point about the 20,000 police officers. It's bizarre to me that the Tories are fighting this election on the idea that they're going to introduce 20,000 new police officers when they are the party that got rid of these 20,000 police officers in the first place. The idea you can then come to the electorate and say, we got rid of these police officers, but as a general election offer, we're going to give them back to you. To me, that's insane and a bit of an insult to the population, in my opinion. Completely also disagree with her opinion on stop and search. Increasing stop and search powers is not a good thing because it leads to further racial profiling and further discrimination. The Liberal Democrat approach is to take a more public health approach towards crime. It's a far more liberal approach, but it leads to much better results because it leads to further reform of the policing system instead.
Wonderful. And Matt?
I'd like to predominantly agree with what Jake said. I think we need more PSOs on the ground. It's one thing to invest in police officers and PSOs, but it's also giving the police officers the powers to do more than they can at the moment. I also think there's a lot of there's lack of a respect. There's a lack of fear in being arrested in certain situations in this country. I think a lot of the police now are treated as mates, and I don't think there is that respect for the authority anymore. I think that needs to change dramatically. So not only do we need to reinvest that number that was once lost, probably look at ways that the police have the powers also. We need to make people not only respect the police, but still fear them, because a lot of people, I feel, don't fear the police anymore. And there's a lot of powers that do allow a lot of criminals to get off very, very easily, and I think that's something we need to address as well.
Excellent. OK, we'll bring Rebecca in.
Our local police are really struggling, but they're doing a fantastic job. I've been out on patrol with them, but it's so serious now that when you make a call on 999, unless it's a serious threat to life, the police won't have the resource to answer your call. And that means that our communities then lose faith if they've had a burglary, if they've seen somebody dodgy walking down their street. And the only answer to that is to invest in more frontline police officers. And that's what we've said, far in excess of what the Conservatives have said. And we find it ironic that, you know, if you've already heard that the Conservatives are saying that they'll invest in 20,000 police officers, having cut police officers and brought police into the state that it's in. But it's also important to invest in education and youth services to make sure that our young people are engaged in society and doing activities that mean that they're not engaging in antisocial behaviour.
Wonderful, thank you. And we'll bring Brian in for the final response. Is investment the answer?
Well, yeah, it is, absolutely. There's been a massive increase in crime. There's a spate of burglaries in Salford, and knife crime is a particularly worrying element that's on the increase. But rather than just invest in police officers, which I would support, we need to look at giving the community more ability to be able to do some of that policing itself with the support of the police, because tighter, closely knit communities are able to deal with this and stop it happening in the first place. Now, community centres in Salford are massively in need of investment, and I would support that as well. So, for example, if you look at boxing gyms, they provide a massively helpful service to young people, getting them in and teaching them to you know, take their anger out instead of picking up a knife.
I am aware that there's an objection over here, but we are going to move on to another public service. As you can imagine, there's a big call to get through a good array of them. As you can imagine, in any general election, the management in the NHS is a massive, massive bone of contention. It's our national treasure. So what the people want to know is, why should they trust you with their health service? And we'll start with Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Well, I was meant to be at the hospital with my husband today, who is having an eye operation, and his operation was cancelled this morning. The second time his operation has been cancelled, but we've got 4.4 million people waiting for an operation. That's the highest that it's ever been. And I think that shows you what state our NHS is in. Our staff are doing a fantastic job trying to keep everything together, but they need funding desperately. So we've said, as a Labour Party nationally, we will invest £26 billion in real terms funding to the NHS to bring it up to the levels that it needs to be at. And that includes a large investment in mental health support and social care as well, because our NHS is the jewel in the crown of the British nation, and we've got to keep it.
Thank you. We'll bring Attika in here. Again, much has been made and there's been a lot of controversy surrounding this claim of 40 new hospitals. So I'm wondering if maybe in your response you'd like to clear that up for the people as well.
Well, obviously we're having 40 new hospitals, but we're also training nurses to come in. We're having more GPs, more nurses, more staffing. we're increasing their wages as well. I mean, it's really important, the NHS, and I'm going to say this again, the NHS is a system that works for all. And there are times where, people have had to wait, but we are trying to change that now. We're going to also invest in mental health, which we have been doing. £2.3 million is going towards mental health. And then also 33.9 billion in total that we have. We have the money, we're ready to go, and we are going to do that. 50,000 nurses and, and making sure that we have enough nurses. We're not just looking at GPs, we're looking at nurses and also other people who can help and balance the work, because, we have to balance long hours, long days for these guys.
We had an objection over here. I'd ask you to include your rebuttal within your 1 minute answer.
I'm a little disappointed to hear Atika spoke the whole 40 new hospitals being built again, because we all know here that that's not true. It's 6 renovations on currently existing hospitals at best. So please don't continue to spread that lie around. Boris Johnson has got caught out doing it. It's again, disappointing and a little bit insulting to the public when it's something that we've rebutted many times over. The Liberal Democrat position on this is very simple. We invest into our NHS for a 1p increase on income tax across all levels. A fair increase on income tax that is very small, that will affect people in a very small way, but it gives £7 billion extra per year to fund into the NHS. I'm also very aware of the issues of mental health. We want to equalise mental health to get it onto the same position as physical health.
Let's bring Brian in.
I've worked in the NHS for 7 to 8 years, so I have some idea of the problems that are taking place. The 2 biggest problems in our NHS are the cuts to public health funding for local councils, which was done under the Conservatives. Hundreds of millions of pounds lost there, which was used to prevent illnesses occurring, prevent people ending up in A&E and in hospital. The second biggest problem is the workforce issues, and I'm afraid Brexit is going to contribute to that and make workforce harder to source, make us more reliant on agencies. The Greens want to bring about an NHS reimbursement bill to invest £6 billion in the NHS, but also £100 million into nursing bursaries to get that workforce ready to serve on the front line.
Thank you for your response, and we'll finish up on this segment with Matt.
There's a lot of rumours going around about privatisation of the NHS, whether it's us or the Conservative Party. We have stated clearly we are not interested in privatising the NHS. In fact, elements that already have been tendered out to private, we would bring back into public ownership. Of course, we can only do that once we leave the EU. It is going to be very, very difficult for any public services, any infrastructure to be that's currently that's been out to tender. We are not able to bring that back into British hands. What we've said, we're going to look at opening GP surgeries 24 hours. We're going to look at different types of tiers of nurses. We're going to look at potentially having pharmacists instead of GPs who are a lot cheaper. Now, like Brian, I've also had my fair share of working with the health sector. I've recruited doctors and nurses in Eccles. There is a lot to be done. But at the moment, we need to start looking at investing, but also looking at wastage in the NHS as well and get rid of that, and consultants as well that are expensive.
Excellent. Thank you very much. The last public service that we're going to deal with now is education. And according to official labour market statistics, education in the constituency generally falls below the national average. How will your party's policies help to remedy this? We'll start with Brian.
So there's a lot wrong with our education system, isn't there, let's be honest. And the Green Party's view is that education should be something that prepares you for adult life, that gives you the skills and the knowledge to be able to contribute to our economy. At the moment, we send our children through this conveyor belt of examinations starting from a very early age. It puts them under immense stress and it separates out and contributes to the massive inequality that we've got across the United Kingdom. So we want to, almost completely reform our education system. Let's get rid of league tables, competition, and let's look at reforming our curriculum. But we also want to to get rid of the tuition fees introduced under the Lib Dem Conservative government that is preventing a lot of people from working class backgrounds going to university. Okay, brilliant. We'll come back to Jake.
I'm pretty proud as a Liberal Democrat of the sort of record that we've had, particularly on early years education in the past. I know in our manifesto we will reverse school cuts that have been under the Conservative government, employ thousands of more teachers, which are desperately needed at this time. And like Brian, we are for getting rid of league tables because I believe they make schools run a lot more like businesses to see who can get the top grades as possible rather than giving children the education that they need. So I am very proud of the fact that we'll be investing in schools, particularly in early years education, particularly for giving for childcare so that parents can go back to work as well.
Atika, how will education benefit in this constituency?
Well, every child gets a fair education, no matter where you are, who you are. And we're increasing funding of £14 billion for schools. And not only that, it's going to be for primary and secondary education, because we believe that the education starts at a very young age. So whether you are rich or poor, whether it's grammar schools or not grammar schools, there is going to be fair education available for everybody. Everyone's talking about education here, how they help, but under the Conservative government, we have brought in some really great stuff for students. And also, we are also going to be bringing in childcare, so that families, mothers and fathers, if they are taking care of the children, they've got extra money to take their kids into childcare. So that's what we'll be working on.
Excellent. We'll come to Rebecca here. At conference, there was a motion voted through that that your party would attempt to integrate the private school system within the state system. Obviously, it wasn't included in the manifesto. What can you say about education, particularly in the constituency?
Well, I don't believe in a two-tier education system. I think we've all got the right to an education and to be whatever we want to be in life. And at the moment, every child in Salford doesn't get that opportunity. Some schools are asking parents for donations so that they can buy books, for God's sake. This is in one of the richest economies in the world. So we're heavily investing in education. We're setting up a national education service, cradle to grave. No matter what age you are, you will be entitled to the best possible education. And a lot of the funding will go into early years. We'll be restarting Sure Start, which was one of the last Labour government's major achievements to help people in the early years. Investing in primary, investing in secondary, and investing heavily in further education to provide the skills our economy needs.
And last but not least, we'll come to Matt.
I'd like to echo what Rebecca said about early years education. It's something that we are looking to invest in primarily. We would like to scrap, as you probably know, HS2, and we'd like to use around 50 billion of that to invest in the regions. One of the things we are looking to do is we want to basically I would like to devolve education. I want the local council to be in control of what schools we're going to build, whether they be free, public, private, state, etc. We just need the money to do it. I also would like to see if we can offer overseas teachers an opportunity to work as well. Now, I mentioned about devolution. We'd like to obviously look at some accountability and regulation for that, but I think it's the City of Salford and Eccles that needs to decide what schools need to be built, what teachers we need, and what funding we can get. I would not want Westminster controlling the purse of education.
Wonderful. We do have a couple of objections, so where are the time limits, but we will hear some from the floor.
I think it's also important to mention that one of the things that we want to do is get vocational courses done that people have forgotten about, like technology, and that's what we're bringing in now, because that's something that has forgotten about. There's a lot of people who don't want to have the normal education. They want to actually go have apprenticeships, learn the real key raw skills that we've forgotten about, which Great Britain has been recognised for and forgotten. So that's one of the things that we also want to do as a Conservative party.
Okay, we did have a hand from Brian.
I just wanted to ask Jake, as a Liberal Democrat, how much he owes for his student loan and whether he's grateful to Nick Clegg for bringing that about.
I'm probably one of the only Liberal Democrats you'll find that is more than happy to answer a question on tuition fees. Probably because I'm the only person in this room that's actually paying those tuition fees.
Okay.
I've got a lot of student debt, but frankly, the way that our debt system works, oh God, I couldn't tell you because it continues to go up as the interest rates rise.
Is it 10,000?
It'll be more than that. It'll be somewhere
20.
in the region, somewhere between 40 and 50. But again, look, I would much rather be in favour of a system. I do believe that people who benefit from a university education should contribute a little bit towards that. So I'm not against the idea of fees whatsoever. I believe maybe some form of small taxation system. It's not in our manifesto. This is just a personal belief of what I think, because I believe people who benefit from a better university education should have it. But beyond just university education, education isn't stuck when you're a young adult or when you're a child. People are continually learning throughout their lives. I've spoken to people in our constituency who want to retrain to become new things, which is why the Liberal Democrats are investing £10,000 per person for them to be able to re-educate themselves and give themselves a new skill set throughout their life.
Excellent. I can see Rebecca furiously taking down notes, so let's see what she's got.
I know, I just wanted to come back with a bit of a dose of reality, really, on the vocational point that Atika made. There's been 3.3 billion cut from further education and skills since 2010. The apprenticeship system is not fit for purpose. You've got many people doing apprenticeships who don't get offered a full-time job at the end, and they're not real apprenticeships. They're just being used and exploited. You've got commercialised situation happening in the university sector, where universities now are operating like businesses. They're offering the most popular courses instead of the ones that industry needs. We need a skill system that works for industry, and at the moment we don't have that, and
Can
that's
I-
what we're going
sorry.
to address.
Can I just
Very,
remind
very
the
quickly,
Labour Party, £168 billion we were left in deficit by the Labour government. We had to make certain cuts to restore that. Now we're working the economy to make it better all these years down the line. It takes time, and we are doing that. That is why we are bringing in more funding and making sure that education is key for every child, that every child has an equal education, whether you come from a poor background or whether you're from a rich background.
Excellent. I'll give Rebecca a very, very quick rebuttal there.
As Atika knows, we suffered a world banking crisis, but it's interesting that her Chancellor was at Deutsche Bank handing out derivatives at the very same time, and I wonder if she has a view on that.
Vice Chancellor? Well, I don't know what the Chancellor was doing at the time, but all I can say is that you left us in debt. We have to clear that mess up after all those years.
But it wasn't a world banking crisis.
Well, it wasn't just
Did that
a
not
banking.
happen?
It was a deficit, £168 billion, which you left with us, that we have to clear up.
If we get stuck talking about the past, we may get stuck here forever.
But the past is just as important.
Because he did have an objection earlier, and I want to keep it equal. So I want to hear from Matt quickly.
I just want to focus on Salford and Eccles. That should be the priority. I think at the moment I would like to agree with some of the points that have made. Specifically, I think we would also we want to invest in apprenticeships as well. I think if we can create jobs you can learn while you're paid, fantastic idea. I also think we need to invest heavily in STEM types of further education qualifications as well. I'd like to see an alternative to a degree, maybe looking at something like the Conservatives introduced, which is T-levels as well. And one thing for Jake as well, students in Salford and Eccles, if I'm elected, we will be scrapping interest rates on student loans.
Excellent. Right, so we've heard a little bit about what you want to do, your policies on Brexit, what you'd like to spend. Now let's touch upon the big question, how are we going to do it, and how will constituents be affected financially by these policies? The next question, well, it was sent in actually by a very witty constituent who listed their job as a professional wind-up merchant. So it's one trade that won't die around these parts, eh? I actually can't read out the name that they put because my nana's watching, but the professional wind-up merchant asks, with every party planning to outspend each other, how can we trust any of you to be fiscally responsible with our taxpayers' money? We'll start with Jake. There were some fairly big spending pledges in that manifesto. I'm thinking particularly of the childcare one.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this idea of fiscal responsibility?
I mean, the childcare one sort of starts to pay for itself after a while anyway, because of course, by allowing people to go back into work, they're then reinvesting into the economy. But the key thing with the economy is the Liberal Democrats are one of the only parties to have the financial system in their manifesto supported by independent authorities. Like the IFS has concluded that ours is probably the most realistic one. And I strongly believe in supporting a party that is not about giving away election pledges in terms of spending just for the sake of winning votes. We firmly have our politics and our economic policies grounded in reality, whether that's investing in the NHS through a slight increase, very small increase in taxation, or the other investments that we want to make through a £50 billion Remain bonus that we're going to get if we stop Brexit.
Brian, the Green Party manifesto outlines some pretty progressive spending pledges, particularly the £100 billion a year extra on the climate.
Yeah.
Is that fiscally responsible? Can we be trusted with taxpayers' money?
Well, I think it absolutely is, because it's investment for the future. And if you look at some of the ways that we'll reclaim that money back, for example, if we can become sustainable as a country on energy, we'll get rid of 60 billion of imports for energy every year from Europe and from Russia as well. We need to invest in the future because the climate emergency is happening now. And if we do that, we can put our country as a world leader that instead of being, at the begging table when things get rough, which they will. The issue of rising sea levels is going to mean that there'll be potentially billions of climate refugees if we don't deal with this now. So we think we do need to borrow, but it's also going to be investing in the future and putting our country at the forefront of what's going to happen.
Rebecca, the Labour Party released its manifesto. It was fully costed, or so it said. Not long after there was the announcement of the £58 billion bill to the WASPy women. I'm wondering if you could run us through a little bit of that pledge itself, but also how can anyone trust the Labour Party to be fiscally
I'm
responsible?
getting extra
we already
questions.
had
I'm
the,
special.
Don't get me
On the
trouble.
58 billion, that's for the WASPy women. And for the WASPy women, for anyone who doesn't know, these are women who were born in the 1950s, who worked hard all their lives and thought that they were going to get their pension at 60. And then the government pulled the rug from under them and told them that they weren't going to get their pension at 60, that the age had changed. Many of them didn't have time to prepare. Some have become destitute, they've struggled financially, and they deserve compensation for what they've been through. So that's what we've addressed there with the WASPy thing. Now, in terms of that as a sum, as a payment, that's a one-off commitment by government that's been made to deal with the emergency, if you like. In terms of the costings across the rest of the manifesto, we're the only party that's produced this incredibly detailed funding document to show every single pledge, how we're going to get the tax in for it and how much it's going to cost. For day-to-day spending on public services, we will not borrow. That will all come in through taxes, and that's referred to in this
I need
book.
to wrap it up now. In the name of fairness, and we're bringing Atika in now because it is your turn to answer.
So I do question about the 1 trillion pounds that the Labour Party are going to they're going to spend. Where are they getting the money from for that? Anyway, what my question? So you can ask a question, and I just wanted to interject about that.
I mean the question is essentially about fiscal responsibility.
Yeah.
Conservatives have built their house essentially on the cornerstone of being fiscally responsible. It seems that they're loosening the purse strings somewhat. And Boris Johnson, in the papers today, you could see him saying that austerity was a mistake for the last 9 years. Is it simply a case of fixing the mistakes that the Conservative Party have made?
Well, it's not just mistakes that we've made. Others have made the mistakes too. And I go back to the Labour Party because obviously everyone talks about austerity, but what is austerity? And at the end of the day, we need to ensure that everybody is responsible and we take care of our community. We're spending taxpayers' money, we're spending people's money. It's at the end of the day, it's people's money that we're bringing in and taking back out. So we need to ensure that we respect those people whose money we are spending. We ensure that there is affordable homes for everybody, that climate change is tackled, that there's zero carbon emissions. We're all responsible as everyone sitting here today. We're just responsible as each other, ensuring that we do ensure that we are responsible in terms of doing the right things for the people of Salford and Eccles.
Matt, is the Brexit Party fiscally responsible?
Well, at the moment, you have to look and see. The two major parties at the moment have had plenty of a crack trying to actually be fiscally responsible, and both parties have, over the years, have shown they not necessarily can on a 100% level. I think if the people have more responsibility and have the actual ability to control more of the budget, and as I said, we do believe in more regional devolution, then they can't really argue that Westminster's been wasting the money on spending on things that they've not agreed to. Manifesto means basically a lie. We've got a contract with the people of things that we believe and know that we can achieve. Manifestos generally have hundreds of different things, a lot of them not necessarily are promised. I think we are fiscally responsible. We have laid out clear plans on what the money we're going to use and how we're going to use it.
Next, I do want to make sure that we stick on this constituency. So this next question has come in from Janet, who's a store manager from Ellesmere Park, and she says that Eccles Centre is in a sorry state. I've lived here all my life and I've never seen it so run down. How would your policies entice new business? Atika, you said earlier that the Conservatives are the party of business. How is Eccles going to change under?
Well, I mentioned that we had the new town funds and we have Section 106 money. These are two things that are so key that I think people have forgotten about that we can use. And I'm actually utterly shocked how run down. I mean, driving around yesterday, seeing how run down it was, empty buildings, empty shops. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, we want to regenerate towns. One of the things that we want to do is regeneration of towns, really key right now. And how we do that, we'll make sure that we work with the councils, if they want to work with us, ensure that policies are put through, and that there's, one of the things that we're doing, low business rates. You know, that's really important. Business rates, keeping that low. And that's how we're going to bring in more investment, by keeping our taxes low.
Excellent. Matt?
We're going to abolish small business rates for startups and new businesses.
Completely abolish?
Yes, the ones that are earning over £10,000 will have to pay business rates. Anyone under 10,000 will not have to pay. Our Rejuvenation Fund, we are focusing on complete reinvestment of our towns and cities and high streets. We also are introducing an online sales tax as well. Any purchase that's made online from a major retailer, major organisation, that 2% tax will go back to help rejuvenate the high streets. We want to create mini economies across the whole of the UK. You can go outside of Media City and see lovely restaurants, lovely shops, but not in Orsal, not in Langworthy. We would like to get that sort of economic boost to those areas as well.
Excellent. Brian, we'll bring you in here.
Well, I'd like to say it's not just Eccles. Look at Mocha Parade. It is an absolute disgrace to our city. And unfortunately, all of the investment that's going into Salford at the minute is going into the Quays, Chapel Street and the areas bordering Manchester. That has been done under Labour, and many developers, for Peel and for Fred Dunn as well, fees and Section 106 monies that we should have claimed were waived. So that was money just gone into the wind. But let me go to cladding a minute, because we mentioned this earlier on in the programme. Will the Conservatives give Salford and Eccles the money that it was promised to get rid of our dangerous cladding? Because there are lives at risk there. We need that investment from the government in order to do that. So let's address our cladding issue, and then let's invest in our town centres.
Jake?
I completely agree with Brian on terms of what the priorities are for Salford Council, in terms of where they invest their money on that. In terms of what national governments we can do, the Liberal Democrats will invest £50 billion into a rebalancing fund in terms of infrastructure to give areas other than London a chance you need to reinvest money into infrastructure. We are the party of local democracy, so we will give devolved governments across the country, in areas like Greater Manchester, the power to tax how they want to, as well as decide how they want to spend their money, rather than having that determined by
15 seconds.
national government.
Rebecca?
I think there's a whole range of issues that we've got to tackle on the high street, and it's not just Eccles, it's Swinton and other parts of Salford that are outside of our constituency that need to be addressed. Business rates is a critical issue. It's not right when you've got a corner shop paying more in business rates than an Amazon warehouse. So we're going to reform the business rate system completely so that it's fit for purpose and serves businesses in this city. Empty properties, we will be launching a property register for empty properties so that local authorities will be able to step in and take over shops that are
15
vacant
seconds.
for a certain period of time so that the community can use
Fantastic
it.
to wrap up.
We've also got to invest in the public realm. We've got to bring people to our high streets and make them want to be there. So we need dramatic levels of public investment. We've set out a social transformation fund to be able to
Wonderful.
do that.
Thank you very much. Right, that's it for the 4 segments, the main battlegrounds. Before we end, we're going to end on more of a whimsical note. We're going to see what the 5 of you know about the area. So we'll start 1 question each. We'll start with Brian. What league does Salford City play their football in? Salford City football.
The conference.
No, League 2. Jake, which company owns and runs the land Media City is built on?
Peel Holdings.
Peel, it's up there. Atika, right, what is the Mancunian slang word for a bread roll?
Oh my God, I don't
We'll
know.
give you a few seconds of things, but have a guess.
Bread roll? No idea.
Have a guess.
Is it a roller?
No, if it's up there, I'll give you the money myself. No, it's actually a barn cake or just a barn.
See, that's an unfair question,
My
because I'm from
Mancunian
Wigan.
friends never
Well,
told me
I've
that.
got a question. I'll give others a question on Wigan after. Matt, which Metrolink zone does Salford and Eccles stops fall under?
2.
Spot on. Rebecca, last question. This isn't one from Salford, but to appease the Wigan faction, what is a Wigan kebab?
Pie.
A pie in?
A pie in a barn.
A pie in a barn. Wonderful. Right, okay. We're going to have one last statement from all of you, 1 minute. The question is, on your first day as an MP, what would you do for this constituency? And we'll start with Brian.
Day 1 of this constituency, my priorities are to tackle traffic and congestion in the city. I'll do that by doing a review of all bus and cycle lanes to make sure that they're not making matters worse. And I'll bring about measures to incentivise businesses to reduce their carbon footprint. I will start acting on the cladding issue, and I would love to have that answer on whether we're going to get the funding to deal with that. But if not, I will press ahead anyway, get that work done and let them take us to court over the bill, because lives are at risk. And I'll give more power back to the communities, use technology and make our consultation process fairer to give the people of Salford a real say on the issues that matter.
Jake?
The reason politics is broken is because our political system is broken, and it's been broken for as long as it's been around, thanks to the 2-party system that we currently have in place. The reason I'm a Liberal Democrat is not just to stop Brexit, but it's to reform our entire political system, which I'm sure the small parties here are in agreement with me on this. We need drastic change to our political system so that people are getting the representatives that they vote for. So not only in a majority Lib Dem government would I support the decision to revoke Article 50, but I would get the ball rolling on political reform so that people who vote in Salford can actually have their voices heard, instead of having this false choice between a Labour government and a Tory government.
Okay, Rebecca?
I think under a Labour government, we'll start by eradicating poverty, we'll scrap universal credit, we'll bring in a living wage of at least £10 an hour pretty much immediately for everyone in Salford so that they get paid what they deserve. On the cladding issue, we've set a 1 million fund that local authorities will be able to access very, very quickly. And if the private buildings that have cladding on don't take the work, carry out the work that they're supposed to do as quickly as possible, local authorities will have powers to step in, take over those buildings and make them safe. That's a priority.
Matt?
My first couple of days, first day, I wouldn't tell anybody anything that I'm going to do. I'm going to ask them. I'd sit down with the councillors, the business leaders, the education leaders and find out what are the priorities now, what do we need to focus on. That's what I'd do in my first few days.
Atika, final word.
Well, I've been speaking to some of the constituents here, and one of the things they want me to do is get Brexit done. Really key. I know we keep talking about it, but that's really important. And then focus on the domestic issues like housing.
It's going to take longer than a day, though, surely.
Of course. Yeah, but, you know, this is what the election's about. This election's about really understanding key issues in the area. And it's housing, it's education. Yes, everyone's talking about cladding. I don't know what's been done about that, but, you know, nothing's been done. But that's one of the things that we have been I'm finding out that there hasn't been. So yeah, making sure that there is everything.
15 seconds left.
Well, and ensuring that people's issues are dealt with. A lot of people's issues are not being dealt with. I had a person come in yesterday, spoke to yesterday. His sink hasn't been seen to for about a month. So, you know, things like that are really important, really key. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. I'd like to thank our guests for coming in, and I hope that this cross-examination will help to inform all of the constituents before December the 12th. We'll see you all next time. Thank you.